Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Peter Murray. I'm chairman of Temple Bar Trust, and I'm going to be moderating proceedings this evening. I have a picture of Temple Bar behind me here because, as many of you know, we are planning to bring Temple Bar back into civic use, but our programme has been rather delayed by the pandemic, and so we've been holding these virtual events during the year. And so this latest one tonight is part of the 2021 London Festival of Architecture. This year's theme of the festival is care. So our talk this evening, I think, really fits very well into that theme. The festival is taking place right across the month of June, lots of other events during that period. So I hope you'll all join in those. But this evening, we're going to hear from Magalie Thompson, who is an architect, and she's also a public practice associate. The public practice organisation is a great way of reinforcing the place-shaping capacity of public bodies across London and probably in the future across the country. Magalie's been working at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and she's the project lead for Placemaking. She's working on the transformation of the public realm as an integral part of the planning process for the hospital's new Children's Cancer Centre. She's also studying at the LSE for an MSc in Cities and is a member of the excellent Design Southeast of their Sutton and Brighton Design Review panels. So Magalie, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Delighted to be here. It's really great to be speaking at this year's London Festival of Architecture, which is a first time for me. I'll just turn to my slides, which hopefully you can see. So I'm going to be speaking about my work as a public practice associate at GOSH, and I will also touch on some research I've been working on for my MSc in Cities at the LSE. So as you mentioned, I'm an architect by background, and I'm now working in GOSH as project lead for placemaking. And the opportunity for my role arose as we are planning a new cancer centre for children on Great Ormond Street, which is being designed by BDP. This new building will provide the opportunity to create a new relationship with the street and in an improved public realm. So I started my work at GOSH looking at other hospitals in cities and was drawn to the Ospedale degli Innocenti in Florence, which faces the Piazza Santa Annunziata, and it was commissioned in 1419, designed by Brunelleschi, and it was originally a foundling hospital. What attracted me to it was the fact that its relationship to its surroundings are so strong, and its strength as a core component of the city. Internally, there is both a women's courtyard and a men's courtyard, spaces which allowed access to fresh air and the opportunity to reflect. Both are surrounded by a covered colonnade, a threshold between inside and outside. The circulation is clear and intuitive, and there is a logic and a sense of progression as you move from internal to external spaces. The buildings and spaces in between are able to breathe. There is also a clear awareness of the significance of art. In the spandrels of the arches are glazed blue terracotta roundels with the reliefs of babies designed by Andrea della Robbia. The 9-bay loggia facing the piazza provides a covered portico, a sheltered threshold between the piazza and the hospital building. There is a generosity in this architecture, as through the provision of this portico, people can sit protected from the elements, whether they're going to the hospital or not. Market stalls or musicians may choose to set up there. There is a water fountain in the square. This building and the spaces around it are generous, inclusive, and they care. Coming back to Great Ormond Street, this slide sets the context for our street, our hospital, and the community within which we find ourselves. This is a site which does not have much space to breathe due to having been added to over time. The island site, which is shown in the centre, has spread and now incorporates the Zayed Centre opposite Corums Fields to the north and the recently opened Italian hospital on Queen Square, shown at the bottom of the slide. It shows how we are becoming more of a campus, Therefore, the journeys between the buildings take on more importance in relation to wayfinding, public realm, accessibility, and as an experience. It also shows how we are placed within the surrounding community. It is a community suffering from the effects of deprivation and lack of access to green space on whom we impact. Our vision is to create a greener, healthier, and more child-friendly public realm for us and our surrounding community. We recently declared a climate and health emergency, the first London NHS Trust to do so, and our broader goal needs to be to dramatically expand green space in the city to withstand the effects of climate change. A key part of counteracting these challenges will involve actions like exchanging paved impermeable surfaces for porous ones, introducing plants and trees, reducing the use of cars, and providing cleaner air. The NHS document shown on the right states, as a key priority, the NHS will work to reduce air pollution and improve local environments, thereby supporting the development of local economies in geographical areas of deprivation. Air pollution disproportionately affects people in these areas, many of whom are already at risk of poorer health outcomes. So it's in fact a very mixed area, like many London wards, and scores highly in the index of multiple deprivation criteria. Worth noting that in relation to the rest of Camden, there are higher percentages of one-person households, people over 65 living alone, residents who are economically inactive, older people living in deprivation, adults with a higher increased risk of drinking, 9 super output areas which fall into the 10% most deprived in England, as well as overcrowding. What is particularly relevant, this one shows it better, what is particularly relevant in relation to public realm and access to green space in Holborn is that only 15% of the land area is defined as public green space, and it only has 12 square metres of public green space per capita. Camden has 24 square metres as an average, and the World Health Organization recommends 50 square metres. Metrics are of huge significance when discussing the impact that the public realm can have on community cohesion, health and movement. These fantastic diagrams by Donald Applewood reflect the impact of traffic on human connection. In the late 1960s, he conducted a renowned study on livable streets, comparing 3 residential streets in San Francisco, which from the surface did not differ on much else other than their levels of traffic. The 2,000 vehicles per day street was considered a light street, 8,000 travelled on the medium street, and 16,000 passed down the heavy street. His research showed that residents of Light Street had 3 times more friends and twice as many acquaintances as the people on Heavy Street. And those interactions are shown by the multitude of blue lines on the right-hand side on the light traffic image. So the heavy traffic on Great Ormond Street, shown here on this slide, is clearly having a negative impact on everyone. Here we see what is a very typical scene on Great Ormond Street. There are often people trying to do U-turns. It's just not wide enough for the amount of traffic that's currently on it. So it's congestion, noise, pollution, and often a lot of anger and shouting. So this statistic, I think, is remarkable. 80% of your health is shaped by non-clinical factors, such as individual behaviours and your neighbourhood. In fact, a study by the Health Foundation showed that there can be as much as a 20-year life expectancy gap between people living in the least deprived neighbourhoods and the most deprived ones. It is impossible, therefore, I think, not to talk about place without linking it to health. 619 seriously ill children arrive at GOSH every day. And this is air quality data taken recently from the new Breathe London monitor we have installed at the entrance. On the left-hand side, it shows nitrogen dioxide, and on the right-hand side, the graph shows PM 2.5 particulates. We know that long-term exposure above the red dashed lines is known to cause a development of respiratory illness and decreased lung function among children. A new tool on the Breathe London website is very useful as it breaks down the pollution sources as well. So it shows, for example, that although 38% is from road transport, there is also 35% here from buildings, which is usually from domestic and commercial heat and power. As young children have a higher respiratory rate, they breathe more air per pound of body weight and are exposed to greater levels of pollution. This is shown here on the left-hand side, where it shows that a newborn and infant will maybe breathe from 30 to 60 breaths per minute, as opposed to an adult who might do 12 to 18 breaths. And also the right-hand side shows the penetration of particulates into the body, illustrating that the smaller the particulates are, the further into the body they are able to penetrate. So I do not see the point, personally, in treating children for respiratory issues in the hospitals if they go straight onto streets like ours afterwards. How about putting children first, given their vulnerabilities? This diagram from ZCD Architects is great. It shows how traditionally, certainly since the 1920s, cities have been designed starting from the bottom of the triangle, looking at the needs of cars first, followed by bicycles, followed by people, and lastly children. If we turned this on its head by considering the needs of children first, we could transform our public spaces. I have consulted many relevant frameworks, such as the TfL framework, the Healthy Streets framework, which is an assessment tool for creating healthy streets, Camden 2025, which states no one in Camden should experience poor health as a result of the air they breathe, the Sustainable Development Goals, and my favourite framework, which is the Urban 95 framework from the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, which asks, if you could experience the city from 95 centimetres tall, the height of a 3-year-old, what would you change? So I decided to do a little experiment in relation to this, and I strapped my phone on the chest of my son at 95 centimetres above the ground, and we recorded his journey coming out of Russell Square Tube to Great Ormond Street Hospital to see what the experience was. So I think what struck me when I first saw this was how anonymous the journey is and how unclear the wayfinding is. Both my son and his dad sort of went wrong, had to go back on themselves. There are certainly no opportunities for play, very little connection to nature, not much social interaction, certainly no joy. So at 95 centimetres tall, the city does not seem to offer much or care. However, it doesn't have to be like this. An event such as the Play Street, we've now carried out 2 of these, allow us to envision a different future for our streets, where cars no longer take priority and the streets can become a place for play and community. And there are also lots of other good things around the hospital. For example, here on the left-hand side, which shows a photo of the eastern side of Great Ormond Street, there is some beautiful planting which was instigated and paid for and maintained by a local resident who got fed up with bin bags piling up outside his home and counteracted that problem by planting. And also these 2 seats shown on the right-hand side are on Great Ormond Street and loved by everyone in the community, but they are the only 2 seats on the street. So these things need to be the norm, not the exception. Cities like Barcelona, illustrated here, litter their streets with benches and water fountains, and they are well lit, encouraging use at different times of the day. It is also worth reflecting on the case study I began with, the Ospedale degli Innocenti in Florence. So many of the recommendations within the frameworks I have mentioned include things like the provision of shade, a place to sit, planting, fresh water. These, I think, are all attributes of spaces that care. So we have carried out a public realm workshop with the Young People's Forum to help create a vision and brief. The Young People's Forum, shown in this photograph, is a group of patients and their siblings aged between 10 and 21. The YPF meets frequently to develop projects to help improve the patient experience at GOSH and to ensure that the voice of children and young people is heard in the big decisions that affect the hospital, such as the trust strategy. CISC, who are the contractors working with BDP on the new cancer centre, also consulted with local community members, and a series of common themes emerged. What is interesting is that the street is an area where there is consensus between local residents, community and GOSH. Our concerns are aligned and the aspirations for less congestion and traffic are shared. This has informed our vision for a healthy, sustainable and child-friendly street, which will include a suitable and welcoming entrance for the hospital, that will reduce congestion and increase greening, improve air quality, become more play-friendly and safer, make the street more community-friendly for all ages, create opportunities to sit, interact and play, provide drinking water, SuDS, cycling routes, improved wayfinding and accessibility, and adaptive strategies for future streets. So how do we get there? As is so often the case, there is no budget for this as it lies outside the red line boundary of the Cancer Centre project. In order for the conversation to progress, we need an early concept and visualisation which we can then use as a tool for a fundraising campaign. What I have here is that I'll just go back to this one. So this slide shows where we are now on the left-hand side, where we are in terms of noise and congestion and poor air quality. And then the next column shows that before construction starts is an opportunity to try things out and record data. For example, a parklet, more play streets and installations. It's a time for experiments. The third column shows the construction phase itself, which is where again we will be recording data. And finally, our future vision for a healthier street. This, alongside a new hospital frontage, which is open, transparent and permeable and welcoming, could transform the hospital's relationship with the city, reintegrating it and allowing it to look both inwards and outwards. So the long-term vision that we are describing, and which I've explained there is no budget for, is where we are now. And we have spoken an approach to LDA design, and this is an example here of their work at the Olympic Park. And they have done a lot of work in Camden, and they are going to be working with us to provide these visualizations and a concept design. Here are some other examples of their work. And we're also going to be working with Tim Gill. Tim Gill is a writer and consultant on childhood and a global advocate for children's play and mobility. He writes about many things, one of which is opportunities for incidental play, as shown in these photographs. Cities don't become child-friendly by providing more playgrounds, although these do have their place. We need to provide affordances, physical features that allow a possible use, such as a low wall, for example. Children are always looking out for opportunities to engage with their surroundings in surprising ways, which contribute to their health and development, providing them with a stimulating environment. However, we can't wait until 2026, which is when the Cancer Centre for Children will be completed, to realise this vision for a healthier street. Therefore, we've also been speaking with LDA and Camden about short-term, cheaper interventions and ideas for reducing traffic and improving the public realm and road safety and air quality on the street. This has been really positive, and we have plans at the moment for making the street one-way, for example, before the end of the year, hopefully. And the initial estimate is that this will reduce traffic by 30%, which will improve air quality significantly. Other short-term projects we are working on in the interim is a parklet to be located outside the hospital. Before Christmas, we worked closely with 2 sets of students from Central St Martin's to help us design a concept for this. And we're now speaking to a fabricator, and we'll have a parklet in place on Great Ormond Street by the end of the summer. We have another play street planned, which for the Wednesday the 4th of August, which is National Play Day. The theme is Summer of Play, which is a campaign to give children the space, time and freedom to play this summer as COVID-19 restrictions are eased. Lastly, we have also been working on a Bloomsbury 2030 project with the London Car Free Day on visions for a greener, car-free environment. We have worked with an artist called Una Knox and local children, creating optiques or peep shows to illustrate what this could look like. What stands out for me in some of the optiques they created is the abundance of green elements, animals, life, nature, and joy. So to finalise my presentation, I'm going to touch on some of the research I have been doing for my MSc in Cities at the LSE, which I started at the same time that I began my placement at GOSH. The research is a study into the travel patterns and environmental exposure of babies and young children in Lewisham. It sets out to see how they are impacted by their environment and the potential knock-on effects on their health. Research and reports are released almost daily, citing more evidence in relation to the negative impact pollution is having on us all, with an even greater damaging effect on those who are most vulnerable. Shocking new data, for example, shows pollution levels are higher closer to primary schools with intakes from more deprived areas, and also with higher proportions of children from BAME backgrounds. Pollution is not experienced equally. The first 1,000 days of your early development from baby to toddler lay the foundation for the rest of your life. They are extremely vulnerable due to the fact that their brains, lungs, immune systems are all undergoing rapid growth during these years. Giving babies and toddlers a healthy environment during these early years is key to preventing serious health issues in later life, which is a risk when early childhood is met with adversity. So I used census data to identify where 0 to 5-year-olds were located, firstly in London on the left-hand side to see which boroughs had the higher levels, and then on the right-hand side it shows Lewisham split into the wards to see which ones had the highest numbers of children. 0 to 5-year-olds. Lewisham is the 31st most deprived local authority in England, and the highest deprivation is found in the Evelyn ward in the north and Downham in the south and along the A2 corridor. The stress risk score is a tool developed by the Centric Lab, which measures environmental stresses in urban areas. It gives a score for 4 pollutants, combining them: air, thermal, light and sound. Here, the warmer colours are the ones that have scored more highly and that are therefore worse. The wards which are outlined in a blue dashed line are where there are higher numbers of 0 to 5-year-olds live. So what's interesting is that when you overlay the stress risk score I just showed you with the deprivation data, you get what has been termed by the Centric Lab as biological inequity. This is the unequal distribution, exposure and vulnerability to health-threatening pollution levels within urban environments. In this table below, the findings have been collated. Additional indicators which are informative with respect to children and their households have been added. If a ward performs badly in more than 4 columns and also has a high number of 0 to 5-year-olds, it is outlined in red. It shows that Evelyn, Lewisham Central and New Cross are shown as being hit by a multitude of negative externalities. These wards are areas where 0 to 5-year-olds are at considerable health risk due to this multitude of factors affecting both their everyday lives and living environments. This illustrates that when you layer the effect of pollutants with vulnerability data, you start to get a more nuanced understanding about the impact pollution could be having on populations which are already struggling. I also created a survey and collated 119 responses. The answers were really interesting, and they showed a strong awareness of air pollution as an issue and a willingness to adapt behaviours. 3 of the respondents also agreed to record all their trips over 3 days with their 0 to 5-year-old. The diagram on the left by Tim Gill shows why this is important. Caregivers have much more unpredictable movement patterns than a commuter, for example. They are out in their local neighbourhoods for substantial periods of time each day, which is shown by the participant on the right-hand side, who spent 2.5 to 3 hours outside each day. They are therefore exposed to pollution for much longer. Essentially, my research outlined an approach which suggests a more nuanced and balanced spatial understanding of the exposure and vulnerability of young children to air pollution is required, and this could help target resources and interventions in a more effective and equitable way. This could bring us a step closer to making neighbourhoods which are an integral part of a health and caring infrastructure. I don't think we realise yet the damage that the COVID experience has had on children. This slide shows a closed playground at the top, which is what happened in this country in terms of children not being allowed outside to play during lockdown. And the image below is of a light well, in fact, of my aunt's flat in Barcelona, where a small child has created an outdoor play area right there at the bottom. Children in Spain weren't allowed out at all during lockdown for about 3 months. I think you were allowed out to buy cigarettes and to walk your dog though. So I don't think governments or policymakers have shown care or consideration. So to end with a quote by Tim Gill, the presence of children shows the quality of urban habitats. In the same way, the presence of salmon in a river shows the quality of that habitat. A city that is good for children is good for everyone. And that's me. There's some contact details there if anyone wants to get in touch. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Magali. Excellent. That fascinating talk. I cycle along outside Great Ormond Street on a regular basis, and I'm regularly shocked at the not just the fact of the traffic jams, but actually ambulances are caught in the traffic jams. They can't get through, they can't get in, they can't get out. You see people actually being taken out of ambulances on stretchers and stuck in amongst traffic with their engines idling. So it is a pretty horrific situation, and very glad that you've addressed it. So I'll just say to everybody in the audience, please do put your questions into the box, a chat box, or you can, I don't know, Paul, can people put up their hands? Maybe just put it in the chat box if you could. But anyway, perhaps I could ask you, I mean, I think that one of the interesting issues relating to the strong reaction against low traffic neighbourhoods more recently is that those who argue against low traffic neighbourhoods say that pollution is then just pushed out into perimeter roads. And you know, if you look at one of the issues around Ella Kissy Deborah's death, that was because, you know, she was on an arterial road where there were high levels of pollution. And how do you create the balance? Because clearly, if Great Ormond Street goes one way, there are going to be more traffic going past the Coram Fields and where children are playing as well. So how do you think we get that wider balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really tricky. I mean, I think a lot of the traffic that comes through Great Ormond Street at the moment is through traffic. It's not actually all hospital traffic. And that's some of the traffic, I guess, that we'd like to reduce somehow. But I mean, essentially, I do think that traffic can get displaced, and the solution at the end of the day has to lie in less people using their cars, really, rather than just moving from the cars from one place to another. I mean, I also think that it's maybe dangerous to lump all the low traffic neighbourhoods together as none of them working. I think some have been proven to work and some don't. And I also think with some of these sort of interventions, it's really important to let them run for a decent amount of time, because I don't think behaviour change happens that fast. So I do think you have to wait a little while, which isn't to say that they're all right or not, but I think, yeah, it's good to measure the effect after a while. I think what's quite sad is that it's just created a real confrontational sort of position between different sets of people, which isn't actually helping air pollution or reducing cars. It's just kind of created this rather unproductive situation at the moment. And I do think it may have helped to frame it slightly differently and maybe not use the word traffic, for example. I think if you'd maybe framed it in terms of creating more child or people friendly streets, that might have helped. But yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, one thing that will help the hospital as well, I think, is that there's so much concentration on Great Ormond Street because that's the main entrance. And we're currently on phase 4 of our master plan, but phase 5 does in fact provide a second entrance on Guildford Street. And I think that will help enormously, because I think if there are 2 ways into the hospital, it will suddenly, really reduce the pressure on the one street.
Yes, well, I mean, it to a certain extent, I mean, well, maybe do you find that actually because you're dealing with children, you are actually getting a better response maybe from politicians and traffic authorities? Because, of course, in Holland, the big changes that happened to roads there was a campaign around kindermoord or child murder, which actually did gain huge public support because it was children rather than grown-ups, I suppose. Do you find that because you're dealing with children, you're getting a good response?
Yeah, I definitely think it helps in terms of framing what we're doing. And I know in Tirana, I've forgotten the name of the mayor in Tirana in Albania, but he's done a similar thing in that city where he's framed a lot of his improvements in the city in relation to children and looked at improving kindergartens and open spaces and pedestrianised. I mean, he also had a huge uproar in terms of taxi drivers and car drivers being furious, but I think that it's been bought into in the end, and I think it becomes much more acceptable and something that people can all relate to when you look at the fact that you're making spaces healthier and safer for children to spend time in. So yeah, I think that framing definitely helps.
So we've got a question around the improvements that might have happened during lockdown. So Julia Nichols is asking, is data emerging on the impact of reduced traffic during lockdowns? And so that would be, well, it's almost an interesting experiment, isn't it, as to whether there have been, what levels of improvement have been.
I think the air quality around the hospital improved in terms of nitrogen dioxide, but it didn't in terms of PM2, the particulates. And I think that's harder in that it relates to sort of agriculture and can come across from Eastern Europe, and it's maybe harder to control. I mean, what's been interesting in terms of the lockdown and the hospital is that we've obviously been doing a lot more appointments digitally or virtually. So there have been less people travelling in. I don't think many people drive in anyway, but there have been less people travelling in. And in terms of looking to the future, I think we, as well as most trusts, I imagine, will be looking to continue that, because I think there's probably a huge amount of wasted travel, in fact, to hospitals and waiting around for very often, short appointments, and then you have to come back again, which no one enjoys. So I think there are things like that we can learn from this experience that will hopefully continue.
So you talked about the red line of what you're able to deal with, but obviously that sits within an area. Lamb's Conduit Street has been made much more pedestrian friendly over the years, and it's a very pleasant street to be in. And actually, there are quite a lot of other streets around the Rugby estate which are nice places to be in. Is sort of group? Are you working with others in that space to look at the wider local area rather than just the hospital?
Yes, so we've been working really closely with Camden in terms of developing our ideas for Great Ormond Street, and have extended the scope of the concept study, if you like, to include Queen Square, so that it becomes a little bit more holistic, if you like. I'm hoping to be able to extend it further, but I think as a first step, these visualizations can at least hopefully help start to get some kind of buy-in and start a fundraising strategy. But I do often find myself thinking that in Bloomsbury, we're surrounded by so many big organisations like, I don't know, Bedford Estates and UCL and the Wellcome Trust and the British Museum. And you kind of get the impression that we're all working on a few of the streets surrounding us. And actually, maybe if we worked together on all these streets, which often touch each other or often shared, in fact, we could get a much more holistic approach, which is something I'd be keen to explore further, if you like. But in terms of we don't own Great Ormond Street; it's a Camden street, if you like. So which is why we're doing everything in partnership with them. But as often is the case, it just lies outside that red line. So until now, we hadn't really looked at it, but it's hugely important.
Yes, well, an awful lot of it is around consultation, and there is a question here from BP. Says anyway, one issue with the LTNs was the process of their implementation, lack of information given to local communities about the reasons for them, and appointing their trial status. And I mean, it's interesting you did talk about temporary installations that can be put into trial things and so on. Do you think that you're going to get kickback from local people around some of the things you're doing, or you feel you get that local support?
I think that there are car owners around the hospital who I think can be quite vocal, but in the consultation we've done to date, it's interesting. Almost everyone immediately says, why can't we just pedestrianise the street, which is probably as radical as we could get. And that's not just people in the hospital, but also local people. I mean, I personally don't think that's necessarily the solution. I think you could maybe create a zone immediately outside the hospital, which was a sort of raised surface and could be closed at different times of the day maybe, but I think you'll still need access along parts of the street. But people are really quite ambitious for doing as much as possible on the street. And what I think is quite interesting as well is that generally when we talk to our local neighbours, they're a bit cross, really, and it's not surprising. We've been building different buildings in the area for over 10 years probably, so they've been surrounded by construction for a long time. So it's not surprising that they feel that way. But when you talk about the street and the public realm, you do start to get a bit of consensus, and you kind of see that it could be a very powerful space in that sense, in terms of at least us agreeing on something and hopefully maybe creating something that everyone would buy into. That's what I'm hoping might happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Joyce is asking here, do you think the early success stories are likely to come from cities or from smaller towns and other sorts of places? Where, I mean, I guess London does have quite intractable problems around reducing the volume of traffic. It's not just cars; it's delivery vehicles and Ubers and all that sort of thing. Other places that you would see that have cracked it, do you think?
Well, I always look to Barcelona. I'm half Catalan, so that I am a bit biased and do like that city. They obviously have the super blocks, which is a similar concept in that I mean, it's useful obviously that their city is laid out in the Cerdà 3x3 grid, but I think you could probably do something similar if you wanted to. And essentially it's sort of the traffic is reduced to going outside of the grid with only sort of residents going through the grid, and there are several of those around the city now, and they're planning more. And some of those I think are fantastic. But again, the first ones that they did of those in Diagonal Mar, they also didn't consult enough, and people were really angry, in fact, to begin with. Whereas now, yeah, I think they are being bought into, and people are really seeing the benefits and enjoying the benefits of them. And doing this alongside sort of greening of schools and school streets, and these sort of green sort of nodes, sort of green corridors, connecting all the different super blocks. I mean, really ambitious, I think, what they're doing there. Similar to Paris, in fact, where they've been really radical, haven't they, with a sort of 15-minute city and sort of taking out all the cars from the centre of the city. Yeah, I think there are lots of examples of things that are going on in European cities to take inspiration from.
So what's wrong with London? Because I mean, Buchanan wrote about neighbourhood areas in the Traffic in Towns report of the mid-60s. That exactly the idea of the supergrid, but obviously on a slightly less grid-like fashion in London than in Barcelona. And there were plenty of low-traffic neighbourhoods which actually have been delivered over the intervening period, whether it's in Islington or West London, and up until now, actually they've been pretty popular amongst residents. And if you try to take any of them out of those residents that have them, they would be up in arms and far more angry probably than those residents who have been complaining about their implementation. So the idea has been around, but we just haven't got round to doing it, have we? We need more greater people.
Yeah, and there are areas like the Mini Hollands, aren't they, in Walthamstow, which I think have been successful eventually. Again, I don't think they were popular to start with. I think there are little pockets of things that have worked. I also think London, in sort of central London, I think you can argue that you really don't need a car. But I think when you start looking at Greater London or the Outer London, it becomes much more challenging, actually, because I think the routes from there into the centre are good, but the routes sort of, those kind of routes aren't. So I think it's quite difficult then to ask people to give up their car, for example. You need to have a sort of network in place as an alternative, as sort of safe and active sort of travel alternatives in place. So I think there's a lot of work maybe to do more in those outer boroughs. Yeah.
Absolutely right. So this is Ben at Bloomsbury Air. We would like to see wider area of child-friendly streets. How do you think we can bring the Barcelona super block to Bloomsbury?
Oh yes, no, I know, Ben. I think that we've been speaking about trying to apply a similar concept to Bloomsbury, if you like. And I think that, but to do something like that, it would involve us working together with those key land owners in the area, actually, because I think, Camden and local authorities don't really have the resource necessarily to look at these things more closely. But some of these institutions are incredibly powerful. And obviously institutions like UECL are also full of designers and have a lot of resource. So I think it'd be really interesting to get together with organisations like that and see, how do we approach an area like ours and make it more child friendly? How do we create a sort of Bloomsbury super block? I think that could be really, really exciting.
Well, on a street level, Barry Munday says, I live in West London and we're trying to make our street low traffic and child-friendly using neighbourhood SIL funding. Not many people seem to know about this source of money, so that's obviously one way of, I guess, if you can get together and agree, that's a way of delivering that sort of change, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and I have been speaking to one of our local councillors, and she seems to have access to SIL money and has suggested that she may be able to contribute towards this. I've no idea what kind of quantity that might be yet, but I think we'll be exploring, SIL, potentially Section 106 money as a result of the CCC Centre, and then And then I'll, I'm looking to speak to the GLA and just apply for as many grants or things that we can, as well as working on a fundraising strategy. So I think hopefully using various sources, we can work on this. I mean, we've got time. It's 2026 is the date for the street vision. It's just that in the interim, that's why I'm really pleased we're doing something in the interim, because I was spending so much time planning for 5 years ahead. And when you look at the air quality data and how bad it is daily, you kind of think we can't wait until then to do something. So even things like making the street one way visually might not be that interesting or exciting, but will have a huge effect, I think, in terms of making the street a little bit healthier, and safer as well. He'll be doing that and introducing a bike lane, which I think you can cycle down there now, but it's pretty dangerous.
Yes, it's not good. It's good. Yes. Here's Ben again. Do you think there can be a role for tactical urbanism in generating temporary pedestrian-friendly blocks, even one Sunday a month to start with?
Definitely, yes. Yeah, I think that's why we're quite excited about the parklet that we're going to have on the street. And I think things like that, even though on their own they're not necessarily improving the air quality, I think things like a parklet or closing a street for the day once a week or for the play street, they're really important, as they allow people to envision a different future, or they allow you to sort of see what it could be like differently. I mean, a parklet's quite powerful as well, because it just shows you, in that amount of space that's normally taken up by a car, there's a multitude of things that you could do instead. And I think it's just it just triggers your imagination and helps people see that something can be different, and you don't need to just accept the fact that the street should always be lined on both sides by rows of cars, for example. So tactical urbanism is great for that, because you can do it cheaply and faster. So as well as making the street one way, we're hoping to put in planters and seating, the parklets, and again it'll be sort of rough and ready sort of approach, but helpful in the short run, and really helpful in terms of getting buy-in, I think, both from locals and people at the hospital.
I agree. I mean, I think the idea of weekend pedestrian areas is great. I've been a long supporter of the idea that the City of London, which is very relevant to Temple Bar, could actually do that, because at weekends there is actually no through traffic from Bishopsgate through to St Paul's, or from London Wall down to Cannon Street. So this whole area with no through traffic, but lots of people wandering around and cycling at weekends. And if the city want to get people back into the city, people to actually use the shops and so on, doing something like that, I think it could be really important, and a very good regenerative thing for them to do, as well as reducing pollution and creating much pleasanter, healthier streets.
Definitely. Yeah.
Got to the bottom of our question. So Magalie, thank you very much indeed for the excellent presentation. Really interesting to look at in detail at parts of London that we can so improve. And as I say, I'm always shocked when I go there that nothing is being done. So I'm really glad to know that you're doing something about it. So I will watch your progress with interest. Thank you very much indeed.
Many thanks, Peter. It's been a real pleasure.